Welcome to the Digital Planning Podcast. This series is designed to educate individuals about all things digital in connection with estate planning, business planning, and estate and trust administration. To keep up with all things digital, please subscribe to iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you download your podcasts. And now, Jennifer Ziegel, a partner at Kleinbard LLC, Ross Brook, a principal at Estate Genie, and Justin Brown, a partner at Ballard Spahr LLP, with today's topic.
Welcome to the Digital Planning Podcast. Thanks everyone for joining us today, where we're planning for authors. We have an incredibly special guest today, Dr. Harry Zegel, who is an emerging author that recently published a well-received fictional spy thriller novel, Shadow Revelations, which tells the story of a young doctor who's a martial artist and becomes a Mossad asset. Dr. Zegel also launched a publishing company, Shadow Suspense Press. He is a distinguished chairman emeritus of the Department of Radiology for Mainline Health and was a clinical professor at Jefferson Medical College, now known as the Sidney Kimmel Medical College. Dr. Zegel is also a very accomplished martial artist and holds a second-degree black belt in Taekwondo, Judo, and Aikido. Dr. Zegel, thanks for joining us. And for those of you who are keeping score, there are actually two Zegels on the podcast today. We have Jen Zegel, who is our normal host, and Dr. Zegel. So Dr. Zegel, thanks for joining us.
Please, and if it's more comfortable for you and your listeners, Harry is perfectly sufficient. Thank you, Justin, Ross, and Jennifer for inviting me. I really am pleased to be here to share thoughts, hopefully to learn some things. And I want to give a thank you to the discerning listeners who are tuning in and hopefully going to learn and enjoy from this experience.
Well, thank you for joining us. We really do appreciate it. And we wanted to begin with wondering if you could just briefly tell us about your journey in medicine and martial arts.
Okay, well, the two are somewhat dissimilar in some ways, but maybe we can talk and identify some commonalities. I don't want to bore you with my entire career, but as you mentioned, I am a retired chairman emeritus, it sounds very prestigious, of the Department of Radiology for Mainline Health, and also a clinical professor. And I'm going to say Jefferson, and I know it now since 2014, the Sidney Kimmel Medical Center, $110 million. Thank you, Mr. Kimmel. And it has become a different entity. But I still am old school, and I keep saying Jefferson, so forgive me and any of the listeners who hear the references in that fashion. But I went to Jefferson. I also trained at the hospital of the University of Pennsylvania. And without going through my entire career, I do maintain a medical license. I still keep current. I still have both the opportunity and the obligation to take continuing medical education courses. So I try to keep as up to date and functional as possible. My experience and involvement in martial arts is actually much longer than my medical career. I've been involved in some sport or form of martial arts since childhood: wrestling, judo in my early teens, taekwondo, aikido. Then probably 35 years ago, I met Benny the Jet Urquidez. I don't know if you're familiar, perhaps you've heard the name. He's world famous, 63-0 in the ring. He's made movies with Jackie Chan, Van Damme. He's been with Chuck Norris. Currently, he's actually having a documentary produced about his life with Keanu Reeves. And they have become our closest friends. The documentary is going to be out in 2026. And I've been working with him for many years, and now recently started toward my third-degree black belt in Aikido. I'm fifth level in kickboxing, and I train constantly. But it's not about the physicality of it. It's really much more mental and in many ways spiritual.
So, Dr. Zegel, what was your impetus for writing Shadow Revelations?
Well, it's an interesting response. I'm a creative person. I like to express myself. I'm verbal. And I've always read spy fiction. As you can tell from my background, I like medicine, I like martial arts. And I thought maybe if I wrote something, this would be a way that I could combine them. And I started to do that. And it was purely as a personal passion project, fun with no goal in sight. And then the inspiration came with Jen, and I am certainly aware of her textbook, Digital Assets. And I was impressed that, a person that I knew could actually publish a novel, a book, or something. And so then she was kind enough to put me in touch with Vicki Gladwish, who is an incredible editor. So a shout out to Vicki. Vicki, just a quick bit of background, was an executive at IBM, had advanced training at Harvard in the editorial review process, now is the CEO of her editorial company. And she offered invaluable assistance, not just in the editorial improvements of a manuscript, which is what you would expect, but in actually teaching me about the act of writing and what a fictional novel actually entailed. And for me, it was very different from medical writing, which I've done a great deal of. Many, many, many peer review articles, dozen chapters. But medical writing, I'll be honest, is formulaic. It's dry. It's informative. Frankly, it's boring, and it avoids intentionally nuance and verbal creativity. And so for me, this writing was something that took me in an entirely different direction.
Fantastic. So if we can jump to your publication, so Shadow Revelations, without giving away spoilers, can you give our audience an overview of what to expect when they pick up the book?
Yes, Shadow Revelations is an intelligent action suspense novel. It's a thriller. But for a brief synopsis, the main protagonist is Dr. David Levy. Now, his life started and was changed when he was 8 years old. There was a bombing in Tel Aviv. Both of his parents were gone in an instant. And that kind of loss reshapes you into something else entirely. For David, he became a physician, a healer. He found purpose in saving lives. But concurrently, he also trained his body and mind for a different purpose, martial arts, Krav Maga. And he learned discipline, he learned resilience, and he learned skills that he hoped he would obtain but never have to use. Then there was Yuri, and Yuri's going to be a name that we're going to actually come back to later in this podcast. Yuri was his father's closest friend. Yuri was once an IDF soldier, now a Mossad agent, and he operated in the shadows. Yuri became David's mentor, almost like a second father. And Yuri has pulled David into some dangerous and unexpected circumstances. David's a physician. He's also an academic. He often travels the world giving medical lectures, going to meetings. And Yuri saw an opportunity. And suddenly David finds himself caught up in a global conspiracy. From Philadelphia to New York to London to Washington, D.C., what started as medicine evolved into something else entirely. As the story progresses, the lines begin to blur. The structure of a healer turns into a fighter. Truth gets shrouded in deception. And for David, every step becomes a test of endurance, of loyalty, and how far he's actually willing to go. But he's not alone in this journey. Romy Morgan is right there with him. She's a gifted analyst, brilliant, sharp, sees patterns in things before anyone else does. And more often than not, she's a co-equal partner. She has a strategic vision. She's fearless. She exhibits a personal agency. She's the kind of person you want beside you when everything else falls apart. And things do change because the terrorism in the novel, the shadow of it, is always there, lurking just out of sight. And David and Romy are swept away into a chase that spans continents, and it's a chase where every move, every decision can be their last.
Dr. Zegel, thank you for that summary. I have read the book, and while I may be a bit biased, I do highly recommend it, especially if you like intelligent action suspense novels. This one is definitely a must-read. On that note,
many authors don't really think of themselves as business owners, yet when you form a publishing company as you have, you become exactly that. How did you approach structuring shadow suspense press, especially with future continuity and estate planning in mind?
Absolutely. And I realize this is a structured comment tailored to you guys. So if I misuse a word, please forgive my layman's approach. But when I finished the novel and I had the first draft, I decided I wanted to publish it, and I wanted to appear more credible, more professional. And who knows what happens if it really takes off? So I thought that maybe I should establish a publishing company and use it to both publish and to promote the book. So I contacted my attorney and we discussed several options for different types of entities and what their structures entailed: LLCs, C corporations, etc. Now, my goal was to have my wife, Nancy Sherwin, who actually is also a retired physician and who was an absolute integral co-equal part of my entire writing process, have the legal ability to both help with various aspects of publishing the book, but to be able to exercise her agency if necessary. And honestly, since we both contributed to the book, we wanted to both have co-equal involvement. So our attorney recommended forming a limited liability corporation, an LLC, as the type of entity for shadow suspense press. Now, this would provide personal liability protection if there was ever an issue that arose in connection with the LLC. Now, the company was also structured so that my wife and I own and control the entity together. The LLC is taxed as a partnership. And our estate planning documents, which have been recently updated, further ensure that the survivor of us has full ownership and control over the LLC. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, no, that was great. What steps did you take to secure your copyright? And did any parts of that process surprise you as a first-time author?
Well, yeah, I put a lot of time and effort and thought into the process of the novel, and I wanted to keep it as mine. And I realized that the way to ensure this would be to get a copyright. Now, I don't know if you team have ever personally copyrighted things. I suspect Jen has, because I'm certainly aware of her textbook on digital assets. But you can go to the website. It's a modest fee. You upload your manuscript and you answer a few questions. But one of the questions that was, I thought, curious was, have you used AI in the process of compiling this manuscript? And I thought, what does that actually mean? I mean, did I use AI to look up a synonym? Certainly. Did I use AI to help identify characteristics of a given geographic locale? Yeah, it was very well researched. Did I say, hey, ChatGPT, could you make an 82,500 word action suspense novel? Well, of course not. So I'm not quite certain at what level this question helped the government with, but I tried to answer it as best I could. So that was the first part, just physically doing the copyright process. And as it happened, it was just around the time of the government shutdown. So there was a bit of a delay. I got notification online that it was pending, and then it came, no problem. But then, and here we're going to find our friend Yuri pokes his head into the story again. As I was finishing up the novel, had the manuscript ready, all set to deliver, and I did a AI search because I was curious, what is the demographic of a action suspense novel? Who listens to it? Who reads it? You know, who is it going to appeal to? And I typed in a lot of specifics about the actual novel to try to get the most comprehensive response. And lo and behold, and I read a lot of action suspense literature, there was a novel out there. I don't know if it's ever gone anywhere. I certainly had never heard of it, where the protagonist was named Eli, and that was the original protagonist that I had been using, Eli. He was a Mossad agent, and he conducted his activities in the same cities, London, New York. I mean, who knew there were two Eli's operating in the same sphere? But I realized this could potentially raise the concerns of plagiarism. So then I thought, I've got to come up with another name. And as I said, the manuscript was written. If you use something like Bartholomew, it's a lot of extra letters. And I'm going through, and then I came up with Uri. It fits for a lot of reasons, and Eli became Uri. So that was the first change in the manuscript. And then my wife, who was clearly the smart one, is saying, you think there's anything else we should change before you upload it? So what do you mean? She said, well, there was one corporation that you mentioned, and you had some comments that weren't favorable. Why don't we see if that corporation even exists, because you don't want to get in trouble? So I did a search. It was a totally fictitious data analytics company that I had created out of the figments of my mind. But there was one out there. So I figured I had to change that throughout the manuscript. And again, trying to keep the same number of letters in the same feel. So once I had done that, I realized that the manuscript has been changed, and we could argue with intellectual property minds whether this was substantive or not. But I thought the safest and most prudent thing would be to go and re-upload and re-go through the copyright process. So that's exactly what I did. Now, one other thing that came up in this, because we're often at the beginning of the book, the copyright, is the process of a disclaimer. And I was also structuring that at about the same time. And I had a conversation with my attorney, who advised me that, yes, you may have had some conflict with a named entity, and that's why I changed through the copyright. We just discussed that, the name of the data analytics firm, but other things that maybe I needed a disclaimer to protect me from. One would be the fact that, and it's not a deep medical novel, you're not learning how to do open heart surgery, but I made some references about handling of care. Could that in any way be misconstrued? There's some violence. It's not a bloody, gory novel whatsoever, but there's some violence, and it was felt maybe it would be prudent to give the reader a warning in the beginning that there are some acts of altercation. So that was added as well. I don't know if you as a team have had any experience with disclaimers and really how much they actually help or don't, and how they should be structured.
So I will say that the disclaimers that we typically deal with in the estates world are very different than the disclaimers that you're talking about, Dr. Zegel. But it's interesting to hear the pathway that you went through in getting your intellectual property. And I'm wondering from an estate planning perspective, because we all know you have an excellent estate planning attorney. I'm wondering, what specific things, if any, did you learn through this process for estate planning as an author of what you should do with your copyright interests or any royalties that you get?
Well, as we've discussed, I set up an LLC, and any royalties go into a banking account that is under the name of the LLC. So that was set up. As far as the structure of the novel, the copyrights for the novel are in my individual name. However, my attorney drafted a license agreement between me and my publishing company that gives the publishing company a very broad license to publish and distribute my novels, create derivative works, collect royalties, and use my name, image, and likeness. Maybe even make merch. Who knows? Anybody want an action figure? So who knows where this is going to go? But this structure that has been created for me gives a broad license to Shadow Suspense Press. And this was important to me because if anything ever happens, my wife will have full legal control over the novels, royalties, my persona, and the license is granted in perpetuity. Now, since the copyrights for the novel are still in my individual name, and since I did not assign them to the company, I preserve my ownership rights while simultaneously granting a very broad but not exclusive license to my publishing company. Now, I recognize this may not be a situation applicable to everybody. It could be a bit unique, but I felt that this granted me a wide license to use and control the works and name and image and likeness during my life. As a team, do you see any similar or different situations arising in your practices?
So I've definitely seen similar structures to that. I've even had some clients that have taken it a step further and they've created a revocable trust, which then is the creator of the LLC that then holds all of the IP. And some of the reasons behind those structures were more for probate avoidance strategies, which were applicable and important to those client sets.
What about domains or websites, Dr. Zagel? Did you create a website for your book or for your printing company?
I did. There is a website, Shadow Suspense Press, and I created it because I wanted to be a bit more professional, and I also wanted a place where people could directly order. You can go to Shadow Suspense Press, and you can go to Amazon or Barnes and Noble or BookBaby or Apple, click on a button, and immediately be connected to the appropriate distributor. But you could also learn a little bit about the novel. You could learn a little bit about me. You could learn about a forthcoming novel that is coming in 2026. And it would also give people a forum to contact me and to give any opinions.
So Dr. Zagel, you mentioned a forthcoming novel. Just to dive in, where I was curious is that given your experience and how you used AI in this writing process, in the next novel, did you lean in more to AI in any way or use it in the same fashion?
Well, the answer is probably very much the same. And I spend a tremendous amount of time online with AI. I mean, obviously, I have the luxury of not having to show up in an office full time. So I've spent not just in the creation of a novel, but for a variety of reasons, I'm on AI multiple hours a day. And I actually have a lot of thoughts. I don't know if, you want me to go into some specifics that I've uncovered or discovered. I went ahead and I have whatever you call the legacy or the pro subscriptions to multiple AIs. And I look at AI as a tool. Some people on the internet or on blogs look at it as a race between this individual manufacturer and that one. And I don't look at it that way at all. They're totally different tools. And if I can, I'll give you some examples. I have Perplexity. Perplexity is a very good answer engine. You put in a question, and in very rapid time, because they have an algorithm that searches the web very quickly, they will give you a succinct answer. But that's the hook. It's a succinct answer. It's pretty accurate, but it is the information you requested. If you wanted to know what the gross national product of the top 10 European countries and how it changed in the last 10 years, they would be very good at that. There are three others that I use all the time. The biggest name, probably if you can use the expression, the 500-pound gorilla, is ChatGPT. And it does a lot of the same things that any of them do. As you know, it has a large database, it does rapid internet access, and it has an LLM that's structured to identify, words and voice and to act accordingly. Also, it has the ability to make images. Now, ChatGPT has, I think, some limitations. It's kind of interesting. When I was doing the AI research, because I wanted to make the book as authentic as possible, we mentioned the comment that the book has some references to terrorism, and there's some potential nuclear terrorism. And without giving it away, I wanted to identify what is the likelihood and has it ever happened where an isotope, a nuclear isotope, cesium, cobalt, has been stolen and actually been used in a dirty bomb. I mean, it's talked about in the news. It's nothing, new or exciting as far as a revelation. And when I went on ChatGPT, it immediately assumed I was a terrorist and started to give me restrictive responses. Very, very different. I mean, at one point I thought, oh my God, is the FBI or, whatever going to show up at my doorstep? And I was not asking how you fundamentally hook wire A to outlet B to make a device. I mean, I was just trying to find out. And then I went on Perplexity, and yes, the answer is there has been instances in Eastern Europe, and I believe Bolivia, where, say, nuclear isotopes have been stolen and the threat has occurred, but it's never, fortunately, actually been actualized, or at least we don't believe it has ever actually occurred. In any case, so that's ChatGPT. They put up restrictions. If you ask them, I love football. If you take a picture of Swoop and you say, could you make this into a funny image of Swoop dominating the field against the Dallas Cowboys? You'll get an answer that says that we cannot use actual images of name, image, likeness in the creation of blah, blah, blah. So ChatGPT has a built-in guardrail. If you go on the other side of the fence to Grok, which is Elon Musk's property, maybe it's his libertarian background, but I can assure you that there are far fewer guide rails in the product Grok. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the ability to generate information is heavily dependent on X with Grok. So some of the veracity of what you're actually hearing or learning may be dubious. But that's Grok. Finally, I find Claude, which is the Anthropic product, incredibly good at nuanced literary responses. If you were crafting an email, somebody invited you to a meeting and you really wanted to decline, but you didn't really want to leave the door totally closed, you could type this in as a prompt, and they would be the one that would be the most efficacious in giving you a clever response in a succinct fashion. So those are the differences in the chatbots that I've used. But with all of them, there are hallucinations which we can discuss, where since they are built to try to generate the next likely answer, it may not be the next accurate answer. And particularly in your world or mine, if you're asking medical or legal information, some of the citations or references may sound fabulous, but they're totally erroneous. Can I ask, what is your personal or professional experience with chatbots?
Sure. I'll say that. So I work in a financial institution that has major restrictions around any data being shared with a chatbot. And therefore, from a professional standpoint, I'm highly restricted in that. We do have some internal off-web chatbot capabilities, but that's very, very limited in scope. So I'm speaking purely from a personal standpoint. And like you, I try different models for different projects. I've spent a lot of time on ChatGPT, as you have. I think Claude is a better writer, like you just mentioned. And just a week or two ago, the Gemini 3 came out, which has been a big leap in capability from where prior Gemini models have been, and that's been remarkable to see the differences in that. Just yesterday, ChatGPT 5.2 was released, and that is geared more towards professionals. So I'll be excited to dive into that because it is at least intended to be more serviceable for white-collar industries, I hope, because I think that, as you mentioned also, I totally agree, there's still too many hallucinations. I have found in the last few months, I think that the chatbots have gotten worse, not better, in what they're producing and what they're answering. And I have often had to say, especially to one or two particular chatbots, please don't just love everything I say. Please start to be critical, because otherwise I could give it an idea, it'll love it. I say, yeah, but what about this? It'll say, oh, that's even more brilliant. And then I'll say, yeah, but what about this third thing? And it'll say, you're a genius. That third thing was the best of all. And I find that it just seems to love what I say far too much, being as realistic about my own capabilities as possible.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think it is that you're finding more often that the responses are getting worse and worse? Do you think it's a coding issue where the AI companies are trying to bring people in and maybe flatter people and they're more likely to use it? Or do you think the information that the AI bots are gathering is worse and worse, so they're coming up with worse and worse responses, or something else?
I think your first answer, there's something to that. If the models want to please and want to predict what you want to hear, and they have over time realized that users are more engaged when they hear answers that they like as opposed to answers that they don't, I bet it sends a subtle message to the underlying chatbots. When my answers are more flattering, I get better engagement. Clearly, this must be what they want. And enough subtle nudges in that direction, I wonder if that could push it there. I highly doubt it's anyone at these companies influencing or saying we need to be more positive, but rather what they have learned by interacting with humans over time.
What you are noticing in overly agreeable chatbots is actually called sycophancy. And it is a big problem. And in one of the more recent updates, I know OpenAI actually rolled it back because the chatbot was acting even more sycophantic than it had previously. So it needed to reprogram it more to help curb that continued habit. But as Ross mentioned, one way, if you start to notice that your chatbot might be more agreeable than it should be, is to tell it to be more cynical and to critically think about your ideas and to show pros and cons as a way to help retrain it in real time.
Another thought that I have, and I think I've seen this, so I don't know if it's totally originating in my mind or if I'm just remembering it, is that as we've progressed over the last couple of years with AI, and you think of where these chatbots get their information, it's either uploaded directly, and that can be from a written source, and it could be anything. I think there's been some legal challenges when they were uploading directly from certain magazines and newspapers because they felt this in some way was infringing on them without having to pay for their subscriptions and such. But more broadly, they do internet searches. And if more and more information in the internet world is created by AI and potentially erroneous, then they are finding things that is perpetuating the AI errors. And I see this all the time. I mean, I know there's various statistics that you can run and metric tests that you can perform. But one every day I start is basically with a chatbot. My cup of coffee, I have a prompt with a task that'll pull up the news. And it's very complicated prompt. I've worked on it for quite a while. And I want to see international news, national news, the local news of Philadelphia and Lower Merion and Montgomery County, Eagles news, finances, sports, a couple of other countries I'm interested in. And I try to keep it balanced. So in addition to getting sources from one type of political persuasion, I try to get sources from both. So I get both CNN or MSNBC or Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post or Fox News. And I ask them to include all sources. And if there is a conflict, please cite which source said what, just so I can understand and get a feel. And without getting into politics, I find that some chatbots actually don't do that as assiduously as others. But just the other morning, I guess it was yesterday morning, my international news tells me that President Biden just signed an executive order on something or other. And just like you, you interact with these things like they're real. And I quickly type one. I believe that the current president is President Trump. President Biden was the previous president. And the response was, me bad, good pickup, and then it continues on with kind of a cheeky response. A little further down, I got to the sports, and it was talking about our last Eagles game, and there were some interceptions thrown. And it was talking about Donovan McNabb having thrown these interceptions. Now, Donovan McNabb has not been on the team for quite some time. And this happens all the time. I actually do the same prompt with a second chatbot as well, Grok, and run the two side by side. I'm curious. And what the same prompt gives you as far as news is really quite interesting. And unfortunately, with hallucinations. And the reason hallucinations bother me isn't just because it perturbs me when I'm getting information. I mean, you can kind of figure it out. It's disturbing. But increasingly, there's more and more AI being used, I know, in law, but certainly in medicine. And I wonder, is there a crossover with the effects and the outcomes to patients?
Well, I think the issue is, I think you're right. I think one of the issues with all AI chatbots is we can spot these errors. We can spot these hallucinations. What about the hallucinations that we can't spot, right? What if it's a more complicated issue, whether it's medical, whether it's legal, where we don't know the information and people are improperly relying upon the information and don't know when it's right or when it's wrong? I think that becomes the real danger down the road for us.
Well, since we've mentioned it a little bit, Dr. Zegel, could you tell us a little bit about some of the current developments in connection with AI in medicine?
Yeah, it's actually an area that I'm particularly interested in. I mean, I, as a radiologist, have always been involved with technology, and I've always been involved with computers. Without bragging, at one point, I was teaching technologically based aspects of imaging, both at Penn and elsewhere. Written a couple of chapters on the physics of CT. Not because I'm a radiologist, but just factually, and you can grok it or ChatGPT it, about 75% of AI in medicine is in the field of radiology. Now, it was first introduced quite a few years ago, actually, in mammography, and it basically acted as a second set of eyes. And the radiologist would have the scans, the images run through, and it would identify any areas of worrisome abnormality and highlight them. And certainly it does that, and it's gotten better over time. But now, in addition to identifying an abnormality, it provides a patient-specific risk profile and also supplies some suggestions for the appropriate follow-up study. Another use that's come that maybe people aren't aware for AI is in the evaluation of head scans. One of the concerning things, if you get a head scan, whether it's from an automobile accident or you fell or you suddenly have a tremendous headache, is there an intracerebral bleed? Is there blood on the brain? When you go to places now that actually have the software immediately will spot the bleed. It will contact the radiologist. It'll pop it up on the screen. And in the medical community, they feel that, time is brain. You want to be able to act on these abnormalities expeditiously. So the AI will actually pick up the abnormality even before a radiologist has ever actually opened the case. Does something similar with lung nodules. It will scan, say, a CT, and it'll find a lung nodule, not only identify it, but it can measure it far more precisely than a radiologist could. And it can then look at the prior studies and identify, has there been a change, a progression in size from the prior, and if so, by how much? Now that raises, and you don't have to answer it if you don't want to, a medical legal question. What happens if the AI looks at one of these prior scans and identifies and comments on the growth, and it was never identified previously? Just a thought. Another use for this, of course, is vascular blockages or pulmonary embolism. Everything I've described are very, very interesting uses. but they're somewhat niche, somewhat specific uses. Each of them is a specific software product. And not every machine, not every hospital system has access and the benefits of them. Raises a question in my mind: what happens? Is there a standard of care that is variable if you do or don't use it? In all of these instances, the AI is a suggestive tool. It raises concerns to the radiologist, but it is a tool. And the radiologist has the ability to either accept the information and report it appropriately, or to disregard it for whatever the specific reason is. The bottom line, though, is there is no magic program where you can go into a CAT scanner, come out in 15 seconds, and have an AI bot totally give you a finalized diagnosis.
But I don't think you want that, right? I think you want to use AI as a tool, as you said, in the tool belt of the radiologist or the physician or whoever. And you ultimately want to have your doctor reviewing everything before giving you a diagnosis, right? I'm more concerned about the scenarios where the doctors or physicians or lawyers or whoever aren't using this as a tool and are using this as a replacement. And there's no safeguards in place for anybody if they're solely relying upon these tools as the gospel.
Totally agree. Totally agree. And I think what we all said is AI is a tool, but not a replacement.
So what does that mean for estate planning too? Because do people want the same thing when it's not as, pun intended, life or death as medical imaging or care or analysis, and it's just talking about the death aspect of it, of your will, of your revocable trust? Do people want still, or better phrase, are people willing to pay for a person, for a trained professional to look over their document? Or when do we get to the point where someone says, that's fine, I trust the AI bot to draft my will without anybody looking at it? I think there's some analogies there. I think we'll see people be more comfortable with solely working with AI on estate planning long before we're there with the medical field, but it's maybe on similar paths and similar customer relationships.
I think that the personal relationship with a human being, a trained professional, is valuable for a tremendous number of reasons. I mean, I personally, stylistically, love human interaction, communication, the nuance of phrases, voice, even the meta-communication with the timbre and cadence of your voice. One of the things, and I'll get back with the novel process, is I'd never had the ability to make a website, never had a reason to. So I went to, and I won't mention the specific, very recognizable name, website builder. And I found out that you had to deal with the website builder through chatbots. You had to talk to them. And I knew exactly what I wanted to create or have them create for me, but it was a tremendously painful and arduous process. And it was actually prone because the chatbots are either not programmed or their LLM is incapable of offering the same nuance and customization that a human being. And with hours on the phone, I was finally able to get through. But in a way, there's a commonality, because I think that the chatbots are a tool, but you need people at the end that can use the tool effectively and interact with the customer, client, or patient appropriately.
Ross, to your point about estate planning, and which ultimately goes to the question of, will AI replace the estate planner, and will there be a need for estate planners? I think the answer is no. And I think for people who have somewhat complicated estates, they need the planner to do the deep dive into their plan. And yes, you can use AI as a tool. And yes, you might be able to say, I have this type of client with this type of situation and these types of unique things can you draft an estate plan for me to meet these goals? I think you ultimately could do that, but you need somebody to check. You need somebody to see if the plan that's spit out passes the smell test, so to speak, right? Are there any hallucinations inside of that plan? And I forget, somebody said today we're more likely to take the word of AI in drafting an estate plan than we are with medical care. But should there be that distinction, right? Should there be that distinction? Is medical care is important, don't get me wrong, but isn't estate planning important too, right? How people are going to dispose of their assets, how their assets are going to pass to the next generation. All of those things are very important things that we can't necessarily leave to AI. So with that, Dr. Zegel, where can listeners purchase Shadow Revelations or follow your literary journey?
Shadow Revelations is available either in ebook, electronic, or paper form at the major outlets. So you can go to Amazon, you can go to Barnes & Noble, you can go to BookBaby, Apple, they're available. And again, I'm a little embarrassed. I'm actually seeing some very nice reviews from sources I've never even heard of. So that's really very, very encouraging. As far as finding out more about Shadow Revelations, I guess the quick answers is, again, human interaction and contact. So as I said, I have the website, Shadow Suspense Press, and in it there is a way, there's an email click where you can contact me directly. And I was just online with somebody else before I got on with you to answer some questions about the novel. So that is a way. And another one would be with social media. At Facebook, it would be at Shadow Suspense Press. And all of these venues are ways that you could find about me or the book or the upcoming book or give comments, which I really would welcome.
Well, Dr. Zegel, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate your insights on AI, on the medical field, on Shadow Revelations, and the estate planning work that you did as an author to get your plan in place with respect to your book and your publishing company. So thank you so much for joining us. For Jen, for Ross, I'm Justin. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Digital Planning Podcast, the podcast designed to educate individuals about all things digital in connection with estate planning, business planning, and estate and trust administration. Please subscribe to this podcast and leave us a rating or review on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you download your podcasts. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.